Stand, say the pledge to the flag.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next item 10, Maddie, could you take the roll, please?
Joe Dolphy.
Here.
Jim Garrison.
Here.
Lloyd Horton.
Here.
Nancy Matson. Here. Rory Pagan.
Here.
Tom Phillip.
Here.
Tom Seary.
Here.
Paul Nygren.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Next item, approval of the agenda as it was sent out. Are you
Make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
moved and seconded to approve the agenda? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Next item, approval of planning and zoning minutes from September 17th, 2024. They were also distributed on your emails.
Make a motion. I make a motion, we accept them.
Moved, is there a second?
I'll second it.
Moved and seconded to approve the minutes from the September 17th. Any additions or corrections? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Next item, approval of the public hearing minutes from September 17th, 2024.
I hereby move we approve those minutes.
I'll second it.
Moved and seconded to approve. Any additions or corrections? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Number 4 on the agenda, Eric Wojcik, Metropolitan Council Sector Representative. Is he here? There he is. Yes, you may, sir.
There's a seat here.
Metro Council, shouldn't you be dressed in a three-piece suit? Sorry.
I will let you introduce yourself and say what your intentions or what you're here to promote. Promote or whatever, tell us what it's all about, because there's a lot of questions about the influence Met Council has on our local government.
Oh, he's gonna have a problem.
I can't go back. Oh, that's great. That works. Thank you. Good evening. Nice to meet you. Thank you. I'll start by introducing myself. I'll try to keep it a little bit brief. But my name is Eric Wychek. I'm a sector representative from the Metropolitan Council. I'll explain a little bit of what that means, but basically it just means I work for the Metropolitan Council. I'm not a council member. So I'm not one of the council members, but I've been working for the Metropolitan Council for coming up to 10 years now, and I've been the sector rep for your neighboring communities that whole time. So there's been a consistency with that, which has been really good. So worked for many years now with Oak Grove for East Bethel for Now Then. So that's been consistent the whole time, which is great. I believe the boundaries were changed, and Linwood was added to some of the communities that I would work with. So I reached out, I think, and Pam had cordially invited me up just to meet with you all and get to know you a little bit and just tell you a little bit about what's been happening at that council for the last year or so with the regional planning effort. But also I'd be happy to take questions at the end, but I thought I could just go through this presentation. I'll try to keep it fairly tight. But and I just threw your logo up there because I thought that was quite nice. I've been wanting to go to Carlos Avery for a long time, so this gives me a good excuse to do that. I'll talk a little bit about what Met Council is, because I realize that not everybody would necessarily know what Met Council is or what the purpose of it is. So I'll talk about that briefly. Then we'll touch on this next planning effort, the Imagine 2050 plan. So as you all know, Linwood did their 2040 plan, which was a few years ago now. We're kind of going around the cycle again, this 10-year cycle. And the local process will be starting again the fall of 2025. So it's not, don't worry, you don't have to have your plan finished or anything like that for quite some time. But for us to get to that point, we need to do the regional plan, which is the 2050 plan. And then I'll talk a little bit about local planning and the purpose of that. All right, what is the Metropolitan Council? The history of the council really comes out of a lot of what happened with pretty explosive suburban growth in the 50s and 60s. Around the same time, a lot of state agencies were created. In the late 60s, we had the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency created around the same time as the Metropolitan Council. One of the main reasons the Metropolitan Council was created actually was to deal with pollution. We had a huge problem with a lot of wastewater facilities, city wastewater facilities that were dumping waste or effluent into our lakes and rivers, so we had a pollution issue at that time. So the state legislature at the time passed a lot of environmental laws in Minnesota, and they also created some of these agencies, Met Council being one, and the main goal, or the main purpose of the Metropolitan Council was really wastewater treatment. That was the original remit of the Met Council. Obviously that's grown and changed over time, which we can kind of talk about. There are certain responsibilities that have been added over the years through changes in the law, but that first purpose was really to deal with pollution. This is the jurisdiction of what is in law. The Metropolitan Council consists of this 7-county region. You can see it here on the map. Sometimes we get asked by the likes of Northfield, is Met Council ever gonna, I mean, sometimes people say they like that or they don't, but no, this is in law, and you can see Linwood up in the northeast corner there. It's all 7 counties, and we've got about 186 jurisdictions, or 189 jurisdictions. That includes counties, townships, cities, and it's over half the state's population within the region. There we go. So the Metropolitan Council, what is the mission? Obviously, we do review comprehensive plans, as you all know, because you've been through that process here at the township. We also have a responsibility around transportation planning. So that's highway planning, essentially. We work closely with MnDOT on that. We also have a responsibility around water quality and water supply. We don't have a water supply as a system, but we help with a lot of research around planning water supply. Water supply tends to be private and run by cities and other entities. You may be familiar with the regional park system because you actually have a regional park in the south of your township. The regional park system, I think, in my view, is the pride and joy of what we have in Minnesota. A lot of other regions don't have a regional park system like we have here. We have 50 regional parks that are all connected by regional trail networks. And I think it's just a really exciting part of living in Minnesota in this region. We have a responsibility, and again, this is in law, to guide efficient growth within the metro area, and we do that typically through wastewater planning. And then we obviously have, any of you who've gone to the Vikings or Twins games, if you get on a Metro Transit bus or the train, including North Star, that would be a Metro Transit or a Metropolitan Council service. And then we also administer some housing programs as well, and grants that go along with that. The role of the Metropolitan Council, we try to do our best work by leading by example. I think in the past, and I think we need to own some of the problems in the past, which has been a lack of communication and a lack of transparency. I think we need to be upfront about that. But we also worked really hard to be much more visible and present. Typically, if a township or a city asks us to come out, we come out. I think next time it would be good if we brought Councilmember Morales as well. to a meeting like this. I think it'd be really good for you to talk to him and hear from him. Another part of what we do is building relationships. So inter-agency relationships, but also multi-jurisdictional issues. So there are some issues that we have to deal with, not just as townships or cities, but we need to work across borders to deal with things like water quality issues, even things like emerald ash borer, which we're seeing a major issue with right now. How do we work together to help some of these issues? This is an important graphic because this is something that I want the township to be a little bit aware of. This is that planning cycle. I kind of refer to this as I don't know if this is a truth or not, but people talk about the Golden Gate Bridge and how if you finish painting on one end of the bridge, you got to go all the way to the beginning and start painting again because it takes that long to paint the Golden Gate Bridge. I don't know if that's true, but we're always at some point in this 10-year cycle, and it kicks off with the census results, because if we know where people are living and what our populations are, that can help us in terms of planning. And that's everything from infrastructure planning to buses to wastewater planning. You see here, the third part of this graphic is the regional system plans. That's what we're currently doing right now with this new document, Imagine 2050. And that should be wrapping up. We should be finalizing that document in the first quarter of 2025. So that local process for the rest of the region really starts with the release of these system statements documents in the fall of 2025. Now that doesn't mean that Linwood Township has to immediately start working on comprehensive planning, because you have about three to 3.5 years to really complete that process. And then you can see here the comprehensive plans, so that's for every jurisdiction within the metro region. And then if a township or a community wanted to do amendments, they can obviously change their plan at any time. We haven't seen much with a township, but some cities change their plans all the time. This is the vision, which is a prosperous, equitable, and resilient region with abundant opportunities for all to live, work, play, and thrive. So this is our 2050 vision. We have these regional goals. A lot of these haven't changed all that much from 10 years ago. I think that some things are a little bit more specific than they were before, but overall, these are kind of similar to some of the goals we had previously. First one being, making sure that our region is equitable and inclusive, and that includes things like making sure we have life cycle housing, opportunity for all, healthy and safe communities, that our region is economically dynamic and resilient, that we lead on addressing climate change, and that's not just Met Council, but local governments doing that work too. And then we protect and restore natural systems. You guys are a great example of doing that here in Linwood. But we really want to encourage other communities to do more in that area. In terms of engagement, we did a lot of engagement this time. I'd say we were much better about engaging a lot of underrepresented groups than we did the last round. We always work with local governments. They're our main partners, but we did a lot more engagement with underrepresented groups. For instance, young people, asked them what they wanted to see in 2050. It's kind of hard to get people excited about such a faraway timeline as 2050 when people are concerned about, the next week or the next day. But we really tried to hear a lot of diverse perspectives and hear what people had to say. You might remember this map from the last time. We had community designations, and you can see Linwood up in again in that northeast corner, just east of East Bethel. A lot of our region is rural, and I think it's important. Met Council recognizes that fact. Sometimes we go out to communities and they sometimes think that we want everyone hooked up to sewer, and no, that's not the case. Rural areas can and maybe should stay rural, especially if that's the kind of character that they want. You can see here that there's a real diversity in community type, everything from very urban to suburban, and then we have suburban edge, agricultural communities. Yeah, a lot of diversity here. And then I can just show you this is the new community designations that are coming out for 2050. Not much has changed. I'd say that we'd probably reduce a couple of them. And you'll see here Linwood's the same as it was, which is essentially a rural community designation. And then you've got communities around it that are also rural. And you've got parts of East Bethel that have sewer, obviously. But yeah, it's not too different from what it was 10 years ago. So we're developing a lot of policies. The ones that are going to be most interesting maybe for Linwood, although they wouldn't necessarily affect the township too much, are our land use policy. For the township, there's not really much that would change at the regional scale compared to what was there last time, I think. But for Seward communities, there's going to be some changes, and you might have heard of some of these from your neighbors. We are expecting a little bit higher density for sewer connection for Seward communities overall. For them to plan a little bit higher density, that helps with the efficiency and the economies of scale of our system. Keeps our wastewater system fairly economical to run. So that's a change that's going to be coming in land use policy, but it wouldn't really necessarily affect the township here. And this is the timeline. There's probably too many dates on here that you'd really necessarily care about, but the main thing really being that we're going to be adopting the plan in around February of 2025. So again, this is the regional plan. And then we'll be doing a lot of work with local governments in the lead up to the release of system statements in the fall to make sure local governments have what they need to do the comprehensive planning process effectively. We did hear a lot from local governments last time that it's a hard process to do these documents. It's costly, it's hard work. I actually had a look at Linwood Township's comprehensive plan, and it's a really good comprehensive plan. I kind of wanted to ask you all, like, if you did that in-house or if you hired out for that, but we certainly want to make this process easier for communities because it's getting more complex and it's expensive. A lot of communities outsource it with consultants, and it's challenging work. So, on the local comprehensive planning side, just want to highlight real quick the great effort that Linwood did. And this was we received the final comprehensive plan in 2020. If anybody's wondering what the purpose of a comprehensive plan is, it would tend to be the expression of the community's vision for the future. So in this case, Linwood would work on that with its residents. Certainly Met Council isn't dictating what that vision should be. It's an important tool to guide future development of land use within your community. And of course that affects zoning because that's the level that kind of sits above zoning. I think sometimes communities think that they're locked in with land use, but they can change their land use whenever they want to do that. If a developer comes along and it's a good project and they need to change zoning and land use, then they can go ahead and do that. Linwood's a good example of doing a good job on their comprehensive plan and doing it early and working with us really well. I will say that we have a lot of resources. For those of you who haven't looked at the local planning handbook, this will be updated again for 2050 with even more resources. But it's kind of a nice, handy tool because you can actually look up your jurisdiction and go right into it and look at things like your population estimates. There's maps in there that you can print. There's different resources. We're going to really build this out a lot more for 2050 to make hopefully the comprehensive planning process a little bit easier. But have a look at this if you get a chance. And that's my name there. I should have really put my email on there, but I think, Pam, I think you've got it. So I'd happily share that after the meeting with everybody too. One thing I will say is that the Metropolitan Council is a big organization. And for those of you on the township board that work in planning and zoning, I don't expect you to know who to contact if you have a question. If you were interested in something like wastewater service or something else, you can talk to me and I'll get you that right person. The whole point of a sector rep, even though I don't like the term much, is that it's a one-stop shop. You know, you can come to me and I'll try to get the answer you need. If you have a policy issue, you want to bring it up with Met Council, I'll then feed that back to the appropriate staff. That's really my role, is to work with you all. So it shouldn't be difficult for you to kind of have that avenue into communication. So that's all I've got, but I'm happy to, I don't know what the next steps are with this meeting, or if you take questions, I don't know.
I would, I guess, direct it to the planning and zoning members first. Questions, concerns, comments, or have members come up and say, what power does Met Council have over the township? And I said, the only thing I know of is wastewater. That's where this all came around from 30 years ago, whatever. But as far as grants, if we don't follow your recommendations and guidelines, could it exempt us from future grants for projects regarding stuff? Is there some influence that way from that council? I guess one question, and other members can speak to.
Yeah, thank you. I'll try to answer that question. We do have grant programs, that's true. Most of the grant programs are, well, some of them are competitive, so we have what's called the Livable Communities Act grant program, and that's for affordable housing. It's also for site cleanup for contaminated land, which I'm not sure if you have much of that in Linwood. But there's funds there for that sort of thing. You have to have you have to have planned for your affordable housing need number to enroll in livable communities. I think you actually have to be a Seward community, and I think in your case you probably wouldn't be eligible. But there are other grants that would be worth exploring. We have stormwater grants through our environmental services division. That might be something that I could get you more information on. Those don't tend to be competitive, and there might be opportunities here where if you guys are doing a project and you wanted some funding for stormwater, we could look into that. I could get you some information on that. But in terms of abiding by Met Council guidelines, the only real thing that I'd say from the township's perspective is if you don't have an up-to-date comprehensive plan, it can create problems. And the main problem is that if you ever wanted to change your land use because you had to change your zoning and you had an out-of-date comprehensive plan, you couldn't then actually change your zoning. So we only have probably a few communities that are in that situation, and they tend to be communities that don't ever change anything. So that for them, they're like, we don't really care if we have a comprehensive plan, and we don't make them complete it. And one example is there's a small manufactured home park that is a city. It's an incorporated town, and by virtue of the statute, they're required to have a comprehensive plan. But they never change anything there, so it's kind of like, why would they do that? So I don't think you'd ever really necessarily be out of conformance with anything. But yeah, it's a good question.
Concerns of other planning members?
I guess
Yes, Tom, tell us.
I have a concern about the battle that Lake Elmo had with Met Council. And it cost the city of Lake Elmo $500,000 to fight it. We don't have that kind of money. If Met Council comes in and says you need to do this, what recourse do we have?
Yeah. Well, the Met Council we would never come in and say you need to do this. And I think that there's a misconception around, especially sewer. We're not going to make the township connect to sewer unless the township came to us and wanted to do that. We would.
Is that based on density?
Can you guys speak in the microphone?
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's hard to hear back here, sorry.
Is the sewer thing based on density?
We do expect minimum density for sewer development. The lowest end of that would be 3 units per acre. And I think that that's where we've had some issues with communities wanting to connect at lower densities. And that's where there can be an issue sometimes. I think that, I don't know the Lake Elmo case really well, but you all might be familiar with, I've been here long enough to have worked with Oak Grove, and we had some issues around, we had an area that we had worked with the city on to identify that they could maybe connect in at some point, they had a change in city council. They didn't want to do that anymore, but we'd actually invested a lot of money in that pipe. So there's things like that that can come up that can be challenging. We always try to work with communities outside of the court system. It's actually very rare in our history that we've had to go through the courts, because we tend to kind of come to a compromise outside of that. There's mechanisms there for that.
Good. So if I understand you correctly, if we did not want to increase our density, there'd be no issue of conflict with the Met Council?
Well, in fact, that's a great question. The Met Councils would really, prefer that you keep things rural here. I think there's also a confusion sometimes around, for us to ever connect to you, it actually makes more sense if you're more rural, if that makes sense. It's hard to connect communities when, if they've divided up large parcels of land, it's really hard for us to come in and actually economically connect. So a community like Ham Lake's a good example of that, where they've got a lot of 2.5 acre or larger lots, which is fine, they've chosen to do that. But then if they were to come to us now and say, we want to connect, it's hard to make that work economically and efficiently, because it's hard to make the lot split smaller, to make the system make sense efficiently. So actually the more rural communities keep themselves, there could be a greater possibility for sewer at a future point if the township or city wanted that. But the Met Council would never, compel that. We would never come out and say you have to connect. It would be something we'd have to work with the township on.
I've been writing notes down as you were speaking here, different things that I've seen over the years. Anoka County involvement, we had a representative within the last year that come out talking about affordable housing. And we should make smaller lots to be able to have smaller houses and more affordable housing. That's not the vision of what Linwood is. I mean, they're developers and builders are building $500,000 homes out here, and people are buying them on 2.5 acres, which is our minimum lot size according to our zoning our development standards. We just about have to turn a deaf ear to what Anoka County, what different agencies are promoting as far as affordable housing, because we do have the trailer court, which is mobile homes, affordable housing. We do have these lake lots that are small lots that were developed back in the 50s and 60s and even before that. So there is affordable housing opportunity in Linwood. We really don't need to change our zoning to accommodate that. And that's some of the pressures that we're getting from different agencies or whatever. Again, in Anoka County, we've tried to deal with them on business development, bring small business in, just mom and pop stores or convenience stores. There's been quite a bit of opposition from the townspeople about we don't need any business. Well, I think there needs to be some provisions for it in the future, but that's an internal thing in the township. We'll have to deal with that as it comes along. The other concern I have, and it came up 2 meetings ago, or maybe the last meeting, wait till a developer comes in to tell you what he wants and then do your zoning. That seems wrong. The township should I feel, okay, my opinion, do what you want to do with it. The township should establish certain areas and districts that are appropriate for business zoning, prior to a developer coming in and then slamming it on your desk and say, here, this is what I'll give you, and I don't know what Met Council has any influence. I'm sure other communities have dealt with this too, but part of the purpose of planning and zoning is long-term planning and proper land use stuff. And I hope that we can look forward to that and not offend too many people that say, you can't tell me what to do with my property. Because we have some open spaces that could be appropriate for business development. We're trying to designate them on our zoning map. And then if somebody does come into the office asking about a project of some kind, we can say, well, this area is designated for future business. That is kind of where we can stay ahead of the game if we do that, correct? And I'm not trying to push the issue too much, but I've been fighting it for a few years already. We have, but I have mainly because I can see the importance of proactive rather than reactive to things. Get it set up before they come in and, and again, same thing, we're getting pressure from developers to go smaller lots. And that isn't going, it doesn't fit into our plan, in our comprehensive plan. It doesn't fit into this 2050 plan that I have submitted some information on from the township side of things. But in order to maintain our rural atmosphere, we need to maintain or keep the bigger lots. If you go to smaller lots, we're gonna compromise our surface water runoff, our wastewater stuff, everything's gonna be compromised if we start allowing smaller lots. And the other thing that, senior housing, cluster development, they wanna have that type, we have a need for senior housing, I don't deny that. But that amounts to higher density, but that can be accomplished through other means as far as cluster development, planned unit development, that type of thing. I know I've seen other examples of it throughout the state and county. I just hope that the township, not that Met Council can change any of that, but that is kind of the vision of what the township needs to look for, and maybe with cooperation of the Met Council, you can help us work towards that goal. Maybe I spoke out of turn, but that's.
Do you mind if I respond to that just
Yeah,
briefly?
go ahead.
You know, I think I've been a planner for a long time now, and it's interesting to hear what you said, because there's two kind of schools of thought when it comes to planning. It's let the market decide, or be proactive and let the vision of the city or township define where you're going. And there's obviously like changes that occur because things come up that you can't anticipate. So you have to change zoning and land use in some cases. But it's interesting because the communities that I work with that have seen the least amount of land use change are the ones that were actually more proactive. They've actually went through a visioning exercise with their residents, decided what do we want in our community, how do we want our community to develop, and that actually sends a signal out there to the market, and then the market responds in kind. So sometimes it takes a little bit longer for some of these developments to come online, but I think, you know, some of these communities I work with, they've had like 17 amendments, and that's because they've just very much step back and just let the market decide. And you don't always get necessarily what you want when you do that. So I appreciate what you're saying. It's hard to hold the line though. I think it's a hard thing to do sometimes when you've got an opportunity that comes along. I'd say on the housing side, I think it's interesting what you said about senior housing, because I've been out to places like Now Then and other rural areas and talked to them, and they're finding it challenging because people have houses that are sometimes larger, sometimes they're kind of farmhouses that they need to close down parts of the house, and then they're heating a big house and they have mobility issues, and it's challenging when the kids don't necessarily live on that parcel. So I think finding ways for residents to stay close to their social networks in the township is obviously really important. So I know affordable housing for seniors is always going to be a challenge. I'm not necessarily saying I have the right answer there, but it's good that you're thinking about different ways of doing that, maybe through clustering, where people can be close to people they know. The last thing you want is your seniors having to leave the township. I mean, that's, ultimately you want to try to keep people here if you can. So I think that's really good that you're thinking about that.
As a senior, I think about it a lot. Look at the gray hairs up there. Any other questions, concerns from the audience and the people? Please step up to the mic and give your name.
Can you hear me? Hear me all right?
Yeah.
Do I need to do my address and stuff? My name's Sam Cole. I live at 6740 230th Lane Northeast. My question is, you said that you want Linwood to stay rural, more or less. You mentioned that before, right? Is there something that Met Council would like to see change in Linwood, or would be advocating or pushing for?
The only thing that I noticed because I'm trying to get to know the township, it's new for me. I know some of the neighboring communities better. I noticed that you all do have these regional trail search corridors. You do have a regional trail that comes through Linwood, but I know you have these search corridors as well that are on the map, which is, and it's an idea where we try to link up all the regional parks with trails so you can get from park to park. So those tend to be on county roads. So it tends to be working with the county on dedicating some right-of-way so that the trails can connect up. That could be an area where I could see Met Council having an interest in making sure those regional trails connect up to the regional parks. That's the one thing that comes to mind.
What about like roads, highways? I think I heard mentioned somebody's talking about Viking potentially having more lanes added to it. Is that something that Met Council cares about or advocates for? Or?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up roads. I'm not a roads person. I'll do my best.
Me neither.
We do the regional. It's called regional solicitation, where the counties put in projects and they kind of go into this pot, and then they get scored, and they get prioritized in terms of who gets the money in the pot. I know that I think that our responsibility at Met Council is for the arterial network, so it tends to be those higher, the higher vehicle roads. So I think Viking might actually be one of those. I'd have to check, but yeah, I know that we do provide funding for Anoka County Highways to do upgrades on the road system. But did you have something in mind that you wanted me to bring back, or?
No, I was just curious, like for example, if we didn't want to upgrade a road or we wanted to upgrade a different road, do we have the freedom to make those choices, or is that something that council decides or somebody else entirely?
That's a good question. Certainly on your local roads, we would have no jurisdiction whatsoever.
Okay.
So, but on the county roads, if they are arterial roads, it would be us working with the county, and the counties would be working with you all on what sort of upgrades you'd like to see. And there tends to be a public process involved in that. So I can't speak too much to that, but that's all I really know on that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
Going back to your trail system and that, on the 2040 plan that they had, 10 years ago that I was involved with, they showed Viking Boulevard going from I-94 over to 35 being increased into a more major artery. It'd be like the next 694 kind of,
Oh,
the next
okay, yeah.
And then the trail system, they showed a network of bike trails and bicycle trails, hiking trails that ran all the way from the cities up through the Anoka County Regional Park up here and through the metropolitan area with pathways. And they did show potential paths for that type of stuff. Now, it hasn't all come to fruition, but if you look just south of us, a ways in Blaine and Ham Lake, they are putting in pathways along the highways and they have to be separated so many feet from the major highway in order to be safety, whatever. But there was a plan in the 2040 thing, extending some of these trail systems throughout the 7-county metro area all the way to the fringe. And I haven't seen that lately, but I know that wasn't a plan for 2040. And I'm sure it's going to be in the plan in the future for convenience trails and park access and different things.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Good evening, William Gabbard, 23890 Sunrise Road Northeast. I think you mentioned that our rural status in the 2040 to 2050 plan hadn't really changed, but at the glance I had at your map, it looked like we went from rural agricultural to rural diversified. Can you define that change?
You've actually, yeah, I can maybe go back into that slide, but you're diversified rural in both, actually. You were diversified rural in the 2040, and you'll be diversified rural in the 2050 as well. So it may be, I don't know if it was mislabeled. Let me see here. I don't know if I can go back to that. But yeah, I know for a fact it does not change, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. It looked like the colors changed on your map.
It just looked like a light green or whatever.
It went from a dark green to a light green. And most of the
So that's diversified rural there. Oh, the color of green is different. That is true. That is true. But yeah, and these colors are not very helpful, honestly, because because agricultural, there's a very little difference between agricultural and diversified rural in terms of the color. So if you've got any level of color blindness, this is not helpful. But yes, Linwood is actually diversified rural in both.
Okay, thank you.
And the other thing, as far as land use and change in lot sizes, it would take major changes in our ordinances to go to less than 2.5 acre lots, which maintains the rural atmosphere. 5 acres meets and bounds, 2.5 acres platted. It would take some major modifications. It's not gonna happen without public input and probably a lot of opposition for the most part, so. Any other comments from the floor? Questions of the representative? Okay, thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll be in contact.
Please do.
Through the agency, through the township. Okay. Okay. That was that. Number 4, old business. We have none on the agenda. New business? None there either. And staff and zoning administrator reports and comments. Susan, it's up to you.
Yes, just very quickly, actually. I haven't had many comments recently, but just looking ahead to next month, it's very likely we'll have 1, perhaps 2, actually interviews permit hearings next month. One for a recently rezoned property, and then also for a cell tower, which has been in the works, I think, before I even started a year ago. So that's kind of coming to fruition. And then kind of just a fun little side note, I kind of forget that we have campgrounds in the township. Camp Ojibwa actually recently applied for a building permit to replace all of the campus tents with actually gazebo-like structures with wood flooring, more comfortable for the campers to stay, and of course zoning approved it, all the setbacks were great. And Oakwood has also inquired about adding and replacing some of the outbuildings, so it's just kind of fun to remember that we do have a couple campgrounds here in the township, which I learned about when I first started, and then I kind of forgot about that, so I was reminded within probably about 2 weeks of each other, so that was kind of fun, and that's all I have.
In the campgrounds, they have to comply with all building regulations, the building inspection, all that stuff, so that.
Yes, yep, they apply for the building.
Not just a temporary structure, anything they put up has to meet code.
Right, yep, and especially those, it's actually 17, so they're replacing the canvas tents, and it's 17 actually, wood floor, a gabled roof structure, and we actually do have a portion in our code for campgrounds. It has to be based on, X amount of percentage not used over the land use, and they're well under that. Everything's been calculated. I did all my little grids and all that good stuff, so they're really good. But I just think it's a city for the, those things getting improved and the campers having a much better experience.
Will that affect our density population?
No. Temporary, weekly.
Okay. Yeah, hearing no more business, a motion to adjourn would be in order.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded to adjourn, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. Not a record.